Again, good afternoon to everyone. It's wonderful to see such a large turnout. Welcome to our panel. We appreciate each of you taking time out of your schedule today to join us. And our objective today is to foster a better understanding of the Part 154 amendments and regulations, and to better understand what the implementation of this is going to require for all of us in the room and for teachers and administrators throughout the state. So one of the things that we're hoping to do today is to shed some light and to develop a better understanding. We must say that the Council of Administrators and Supervisors support the programs that do enhance ELL initiatives, but we are concerned about the new regulations and the impact that they are going to have in changing responsibilities for our members. We're concerned over the length of the regulations, they're over 100 pages, and the details that are contained within, and the way that the review and approval took place during the summer months. It did not take place during the school year when many stakeholders were available. But the revisions do include the following, and not limited to the following, but new language, English language identification processes, parent notification requirements, student placement review, including due process, additional record keeping, new program requirements, development of language proficiency teams, entry and exit criteria requirements, identification of students with disabilities, support and transition services, and professional development for staff. We have asked members of our group here today to submit their questions and concerns, so again we could better understand the revisions. And we've tried to summarize these and organize these into a coherent order today. We recognize that our panel represent different constituencies and that their responses are going to reflect that. And we appreciate, again, them taking time to share their understanding of the information to help us today. But we also recognize that no one in this room probably has all the answers to the many revisions in this amendment. And we're going to try today to just work together to better understand what this is going to entail for us. So let's begin in this manner to ask each of the panel members if they can provide for us their understanding of the reasons why the regulations were reviewed and why they were revised. And I guess we'll start with Regent Tillis, since you're closest to the podium.
Well, I'm the one who's supposed to know why we approve them, which isn't...
Can you tell us?
Yes? Oh. I'm supposed to know why we approve them as the regents. We approved them last month, and that was the September meeting, so it was in the school year a little bit. By the way, this place looks like a classroom in Hempstead, except there aren't so many of you on the floor. Talk about problems in districts, and I know many of you probably have the same problems with overloaded classrooms from some of the new citizens or non-citizens of the country. We were, the issue of ELL students has been before us before, ahead of this meeting, and I can only tell you what we were told and what my reaction to it was. This was an issue that we were told is one of civil rights that would have to be basically approved because these students had the right to all of the parts of this regulation. I questioned that during the meeting and said, look, I'm all in favor of making sure these students and all students have an adequate education. But I didn't know, since I had been tipped off by 3 or 4 districts beforehand and by Senator Martins, who also had called from Port Washington, Manhasset, some of the other districts in my area near Great Neck, talking about the costs of these regulations. about 3 days ahead of time, I got this call, and Port Washington, I think, was $2.5 million was the cost.
Can you talk closer to the mic? Thank
Well,
you.
if I do, it's going to make
That's all right, I'll manage it. Just
backwards.
nice and close.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I will crouch down. And I had been tipped off on this, on these regulations by a few school districts before we made the, before it was presented to us. And I raised the questions of cost to the other regions. Not a question of whether or not these were necessary under civil rights, but how are we going to possibly pay for this? And in doing so, I raised the question of, that has been a question, I think I raised it last time, about special ed students. I'm a strong advocate for special ed and for ELL students. I don't want to get into the possibility, which I think is coming, given the property tax cap, of taking monies that have been budgeted or will be budgeted under certain limits, and taking it out of general ed programs and putting it into either special ed or ELL programs. That's not the way this is supposed to work. It will cause tension in the community. It will cause programs to be cut that are very popular in the community. And while giving the civil rights, who's going to pay for those? And I had suggested that this was part of a federal responsibility, because the language here and in special ed often really come from USDOE, and that the feds had a responsibility, especially with the new influx of children that are coming into our schools. And we, as regions, passed this regulation with an addendum to it that said we need to ask and seek funds for this, because I just feel that we're getting to the point that our general ed parents are going to have a rebellion, and I don't want to see that, and I don't know what the answer is. I was told, and I can only go by the experts, and we have people here that probably know more about the specifics than I do, since I didn't read 100 pages before our meeting. I only went by what districts told me. And I'm really concerned with the specifics, because I was told, again, by our staff and by the commissioner, that this was absolutely the minimum necessary to meet the civil rights requirements. In terms of what the rationale was, this is why we did it, and it should have been done long ago. I don't know if that's an answer for you, but that's what we were told.
Thank you, Regent Tillis. Senator Flanagan, from your perspective, what did you see the need, or what do you understand the need for the change in regulations to be?
You know what, this is a very interesting scenario, because when I look at the people who are seated up here, particularly the people in the audience as well, I play a unique role, but that doesn't make me anything special, because I probably know less than on this issue than almost anybody in the room, because on a practical level, you are the ones that have to do all the real work when these regulations are implemented, and when, you know, when the rubber meets the road. So I'm going to give a perspective in a couple of different ways. And I read some of the memos that have come from State Ed, which frankly are quite detailed and quite good. So I can look at this from a couple of different angles. First of all, I want to remind everyone, which you all know, but it bears repeating. Legislators are generalists. The only person who I believe is an expert in the New York State Legislature in either house is Kemp Hannon, who's chair of the Health Committee. He's widely regarded as a true expert in healthcare policy and healthcare financing. My colleagues think I'm an expert in education, and I'm not. I know more than a lot of my colleagues, but that doesn't make me an expert by any stretch. So I think it's important to recognize that, and I can tell you, and I know this is going to sound crazy in a way, the first real substantive discussion I had on this subject was with Tony Larino in my office over the summer. No one should labor under the misimpression that there's a hue and cry and that people have been banging down my door. I've been chair of the committee for 4 years, and I haven't had a lot of people come to me on this subject. So when I say these things, I want to be very respectful in terms of how I approach them. When Regent Tillis, who we were hanging out more, we were at Stony Brook last night at an educational forum, and the good news is that we work very well together, and I respect what was said early on. He says what he means and means what he says, and that's refreshing on so many different levels. But you know, when you talk about civil rights, I think I pay fairly good attention, but I'm trying to figure out, like, what's the issue? And believe me, I want to have kids get the appropriate education. But I look at this to a degree that it's like a solution in search of a problem. Because I have not had districts that I represent, and I haven't had a lot of people coming to me saying, this is a travesty, that we're not meeting the needs of children. And when you talk about civil rights, okay, is that emanating from the federal government, from the U.S. Department of Education? Is it coming from the state education department? Or is it coming from advocacy groups? And advocacy groups play a critical role in this process. But that doesn't always mean they're right. And while the advocates are out there, that's part of our democratic process, part of the regulatory process, part of the legislative process. But the reality is that the advocates are not doing the work that you do. So you can be passionate, you can be dedicated, you can be forthright, but they may be pushing things that they don't understand what that will mean in reality. So from a legislative standpoint, I think of it that way. Well-intended, but not necessarily well implemented or well executed, because they're not looking at it the same way. So, and then of course you get to the bottom line, which is all these wonderful ideas. Somebody's got to come up with the bucks. And we could have probably a day-long discussion at least about what the federal government does or not in terms of driving money to the state of New York. But I'm not even going to touch that. This is, I would say, from a legislative perspective, the part that really concerns me is the actual practical application and commensurate with that, the cost. What exactly is this going to mean? Because I think of this, all right, 20 kids in a school versus now 20 kids in a district. All the other things in the regulations, I'm telling you right now, my colleagues are not going to pay attention to that. I don't care what your stripes are. Assembly, Senate, Democrat, Republican, we are going to hear, as Regent Tillis said, from school districts saying, we have to bus these kids, we have to do things, we're going to have to hire more personnel, and even if we happen to agree with you, you're killing us because you're not giving us the money. Now, I spoke to State Ed on my way over here. Regent Tillis said to this specifically, guarantee that State Ed and the Regents, as part of their budget request next year, they're going to ask for more money on this subject. I'll guarantee that the next governor will not put a nickel in his proposed budget. I don't see any circumstance where there's going to be anything there, because what the governor will do is he's going to want to make State Ed advocate, he's going to want to make you advocate, and he's going to want to make the Assembly and the Senate be the ones that have to come up with the money. So I don't mean to, throw cold water on what's going on, but I think there's an element of that is going to be very practical in terms of where we go.
I just want to add one thing.